I walked up to the Whitaker mansion that day with my best navy dress uniform perfectly pressed, my shoes shining so clean they could blind someone in the Georgia sun. I hadn't seen my family in almost a year since returning from Afghanistan, and honestly, I thought this wedding might fix things. Foolish hope. I even paid for a nice hotel room the night before, so I could feel like I belonged in their world again. When I reached the grand entrance, 2 security guards checked a tablet at the doors. My heart was racing, but for the first time in years, it was with excitement. I was ready to smile, shake hands, take photos, maybe even hug my mom without awkwardness. Then Robert, my father, stepped forward out of nowhere. He wasn't even dressed appropriately. He looked like he'd just come from barking orders at the staff. His face was cold, tight, and right next to him was Margaret, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. "You're not on the guest list," Robert said, without hesitation, loud enough that everyone standing nearby could hear. It took me a second to process. "Dad." "What?" I said, quietly at first. He didn't repeat himself. He stepped aside so I could see Lily standing inside, about 20 feet away in her $1,000 dress, grinning. Not smiling grinning. The kind of grin that says, "I got exactly what I wanted." Guests standing near the entrance turned to look at me. I could hear murmurs, the low judgmental noise that crowds make when they smell gossip. Someone even chuckled. I could feel my cheeks burn under their stares, but I held my breath and kept my face straight. I wanted to argue. Of course I did. I wanted to scream, "I'm your daughter too," but Lily's expression killed that urge completely. She didn't even look embarrassed or conflicted. She looked satisfied. So I nodded, said nothing, turned on my heel, and walked away, my dress shoes clicking on the stone path like a slow drumbeat marking my humiliation. I could almost hear them behind meth whispers, the phones coming out to record, maybe even a few smirks from people who followed Lily's perfectly curated Instagram life. By the time I reached my car, I could feel my hands shaking. I sat there momentarily, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how many people inside that mansion knew what was happening at the door. Probably no one cared. That's how it always was. I checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew no one would text. But there was one message from Brandon, my old friend from base, who was supposed to meet me at the wedding. "Where are you?" he texted. They wouldn't let me in either. That one nearly made me laugh. Not even bitter laughter, just disbelief. Brandon was probably the only person I'd invited myself, and even he wasn't good enough for Lily's guest list. Typical. I pulled out of the parking lot, careful not to speed, because the last thing I needed was a ticket on top of all this. As I drove past the hotel valet area, I caught one last glance through the glass doors. Lily was standing there posing for a photographer, bouquet in hand, veil draped just right, smiling like she was the picture of grace and elegance. I muttered under my breath, "Perfect family, my ass." If you've ever been humiliated by your own family, or seen how social media masks real dysfunction, you know exactly how it feels. Drop a comment below if you've been there, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. Driving home felt longer than it should have. I couldn't even play music. I just let the silence sit heavy in the car. I repeatedly replayed the scene, wondering if I missed any clues leading up to this, but no, they planned it. Every bit of it. And the worst part wasn't even being turned away. It was easy for them how comfortable they looked shutting me out like I never mattered. I didn't send them money when they were behind on mortgage payments, or help cover that new roof for Margaret's precious boutique. When I pulled into my driveway, the phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. I let it ring. No voicemail. Inside my house, everything felt colder than usual. I sat down, still wearing my uniform, and trying to process what had happened. Then, out of nowhere, my phone started buzzing again. Another unknown number, then another. Notifications are popping up from social media, such as Instagram, Facebook, and even a few emails. Something was happening online, and whatever it was, it had my name attached to it. I tossed my phone onto the couch without checking the notifications, sinking into that familiar numbness that always followed when my family reminded me where I stood. As a kid, I learned early that being seen in my family was optional and that I wasn't on the list. Lily always was. From the time she was a toddler, everything revolved around her. I remember Margaret dressing her up like a doll, dragging her to pageants, smiling proudly as Lily twirled in those ridiculous little dresses. I was the quiet one, and apparently, that meant forgettable. One of my earliest memories was standing at Lily's 6th birthday party, holding a paper plate while Margaret barked, "Erin, hand these out faster." I must have been 9. Maybe if I worked hard enough, I'd get a slice of cake with everyone else. Instead, by the time I sat down, Margaret was already taking plates away to clear space for Lily's presents. Lily, meanwhile, was basking in all the attention like she was born to be the center of every room. Even as teenagers, nothing changed. Lily got a brand new Jeep for her sweet 16. I got handed the keys to Robert's old truck with 2 broken windows and a missing door handle. I didn't even ask for a car, but the contrast wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me. When Margaret threw that huge party for Lily's 16th, I remember working the grill in the backyard because Margaret insisted I help out since you're so responsible. I spent most of that party flipping burgers for Lily's friends while she posed for selfies with her balloon arch. At school, the same story played out in smaller ways. Lily's dance recitals? Everyone showed up, flowers in hand. My science fair? Robert once said, "Oh, I didn't know you had that today," while Margaret waved me off because she was too busy driving Lily to her cheerleading practice. I realized that if I wanted their acknowledgement, I had to do something useful, so I started working, babysitting, tutoring, and part-time jobs before I even graduated. The more money I brought home, the more they smiled at me, for about 5 seconds. When I told them at 18 I was joining the army, you'd think I'd slapped Margaret in the face. She stared at me briefly before saying, "But why would you leave? Lily still needs your help." I think that's when I finally accepted it. I wasn't the daughter they worried about or invested in emotionally. I was just the fallback plan, the reliable one, the one who would handle everything quietly so Lily could shine. And it didn't stop once I left. Every phone call from them during my deployments had the same theme. "Can you send some money? We're tight this month." Or, "Lily needs help with this expense, Erin. Could you pitch in?" I wired money home like clockwork, not because I thought it would buy love, at least not consciously, but maybe because it kept me connected, even if I was thousands of miles away and entirely forgotten unless they needed me. When I came back stateside and asked about those loan sloans being a generous term Robert would brush me off with, "It all goes into the family." Margaret would say, "You're always so serious, Erin. You should smile more like Lily." That line stuck with me. Smile more like Lily. As if smiling had ever gotten me anywhere in that house. Lily's smile was a weapon. Mine was invisible. I remember once, during a brief visit home between deployments, they held a family dinner. Margaret gushed over Lily's latest Instagram brand deal, and Robert poured champagne. He toasted to Lily's bright future, while I sat at the corner of the table, sipping flat soda, not even asking what I'd been doing overseas. When I mentioned my promotion to staff sergeant, Margaret waved it off. "That's great, but Lily just signed with an agency in Austin." My life happened in a parallel universe that they didn't care about. Sitting there on my couch now, in the present, in full dress uniform I didn't even get to show off at the wedding, all those moments felt like puzzle pieces snapping into place. The wedding rejection wasn't random. It wasn't about an RSVP mistake or a guest list mix-up. This was precisely where they wanted me, outside the door. So I didn't bother taking the uniform off. I just sat in it, staring at my phone as the notifications buzzed. My whole life had been a build-up to that moment at the wedding entrance, which made perfect sense. I stood up finally and poured myself a glass of water, staring at the glass for a moment before setting it down untouched. I leaned back into the couch, still in my uniform, as my mind drifted back to the desert heat of Afghanistan, where I'd spent years sending money home to people who never thought twice about how hard I worked for it. Joining the army had felt like the only way to break out of being invisible. I enlisted at 18 just to get out of Savannah, far from a family that never saw me unless they needed something. And at first, being deployed was a relief. No Lily, no Margaret judging my clothes, no Robert barking orders disguised as fatherly advice. Just me, my unit, and the job. But even half a world away, their reach never quite let go. The emails and calls always found me. Margaret would write long, guilt-laced emails. "Erin, we're struggling this month. Caldwell Construction isn't doing so well. Can you help? Just a little bit. And I always did. Even from Kabul, where the days were long, dangerous, and exhausting, I wired money back home, sometimes $500, sometimes $2,000 at a time. I told myself it was temporary, that this would help them get back on track, and one day they'd look at me and think, she saved us. Robert, of course, kept it all business. No thanks, no appreciation, just short texts, funds received, that'll help with the mortgage. I should have realized it wasn't a one-time thing. The requests kept coming, always disguised as just this once, always paired with some excuse about Lily's latest expenses. Her college apartment rent, her new car. Wedding planning started entering the conversation long before any fiancé was in sight. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sitting in a dusty outpost thousands of miles away, I was budgeting carefully to keep sending cash back to Savannah. At the same time, Margaret posted pictures of Lily's shopping sprees and lifestyle content. Designer handbags, spa days, brunch at the newest spots, all funded, at least partly, by the invisible daughter overseas. And it wasn't just money. When Robert complained about their accounting system falling apart, I spent hours helping him set up online banking and digital bookkeeping over patchy internet connections after my shift ended. When Margaret wanted a new website for her boutique, I stayed up one night redesigning it myself because she said they couldn't afford a designer. Not once did I hear thank you. Even when I came home briefly for a 2-week leave, nothing changed. Lily barely acknowledged me at family dinner, too busy showing off her latest Instagram partnership. Margaret spent the whole evening bragging about Lily's followers. Robert gave me a stiff handshake and joked, "Don't forget we still need help with that second mortgage, Aaron." It was like my whole existence had been reduced to being their emergency fund. When my deployments extended, I didn't argue. Being out in the middle of nowhere with a rifle on my back was easier than sitting at that family dinner table watching them toast to Lily's success while asking me for another loan. I can still remember the sound of the mortar fire outside the base one night when I got an email from Margaret with the subject line, "We're struggling." The email contained a single sentence. "Could you wire another $5,000? Lily's moving to Austin for her influencer career." That one made me laugh out loud. I read it sitting on a crate of ammunition, surrounded by people who barely knew their families but still talked about them warmly. I realized in that moment that my situation was different. My family didn't talk about me unless I was useful, and yet I sent the money anyway. The trust account became my default way of helping. I set it up so that Robert could manage withdrawals while I was overseas. I thought it made sense then. They needed flexibility, I was far away, and surely they wouldn't misuse it. Looking back, that trust was the most naive thing I ever did. Even after I came home, I didn't check it closely. I assumed they were only using what they needed. It isn't very comfortable to admit now, but I didn't even ask for statements. Robert would say, "We're good," and I believed him. It was easier to believe them than to dig deeper and confront what I knew was probably true, that I was just the reliable ATM for the family's endless spending and Lily's carefully curated social media life. I took another sip of water from the kitchen counter, feeling how empty the house felt even though I was finally home. My dress uniform still felt stiff on my shoulders. And in that moment, standing alone in my kitchen, the absurdity of it all hit me. While I spent years dodging IEDs and sweating under Kevlar, Lily had been posing for likes on Instagram, funded by me. I left the glass untouched on the counter and walked to the window, staring into the street where everything except me looked exactly as I'd left it. Coming back to Savannah after my final deployment had felt heavy but hopeful. I told myself that maybe this time would be different. Maybe being home for good would finally shift something. When I stepped off that plane at the airport, wearing civvies instead of uniform for once, I expected Margaret and Robert to be waiting. They weren't. I didn't even get their text until later that evening. "Let us know when you're settled." No balloons, no hug, no welcome sign, just a vague message that felt like checking off a box. So I took a cab home from the airport with my gear stacked beside me in the back seat. When I pulled into my driveway, my house looked exactly as it had 8 years ago, except the grass needed cutting and my porch light was out. The house I paid for with my savings from deployments, which I barely got to live in because I was always somewhere else, helping them out from afar. I spent that first evening unpacking in silence. No calls from Lily, no invitation from Margaret to come over for dinner, not even a drop-by from Robert. The next morning, I decided to take the first step, like always. I called Margaret. Hey Mom, I said, trying to sound casual. Her response? Oh, Aaron, I thought you'd call yesterday. Anyway, Lily's busy prepping some shoots this week, but maybe we can get together soon. Prepping some shoots. That was the excuse for why my own family didn't welcome me home after 10 years away and thousands of dollars sent their way. Determined not to take the hint, I offered to stop by Caldwell Construction's office to say hello. Robert sounded distracted on the phone, but agreed. When I arrived, he was in the middle of a tense call, pacing behind his cluttered desk, barely looking up as I walked in. Hey, Aaron, he mumbled, waving me to a chair. Sorry, can't talk long, things are tight around here. I sat there, feeling like a visitor in a family business I had essentially funded. Stacks of papers sat everywhere, and a coffee mug sat half empty on the edge of his desk, with the Caldwell Construction logo proudly printed on Ida logo. I had helped redesign one night during deployment because our old one looks outdated, Aaron. When he finally hung up, he launched into a casual rundown of the company's financial woes without missing a beat. Client backed out of a contract last month, he said, scratching his forehead. But we'll figure it out. We always do. Might need to lean on the family a bit more. Lean on the family. Translation, more money from me. He never asked about my service, health, or plans now that I was back. No question about what I'd seen or done, or what it felt like to come home after years of war, finally. Instead, he glanced at me and asked, You able to help keep us afloat for a bit? Just for a few months while we stabilize? I didn't answer immediately. I just sat there, staring at the framed photos on his wall, Lily smiling in designer clothes, Lily at her graduation, Lily posing at some influencer event Margaret attended. Not one photo of me in uniform. Not even from boot camp. I left without committing to anything. On my way out, Margaret called. I heard you stopped by the office. Everything okay? She asked, but not in a warm way. More like she was checking whether I would pull my weight again. That weekend, I got a formal wedding invitation in the mail. Not hand-delivered. No personal note, just a shiny card with perfectly printed letters and an RSVP line that made me pause. There was no option for a guest. No +1. Just my name and the date, like a formality they had to send out. When I called Margaret to ask about it, she was quick to dismiss. Oh, Lily just wants a smaller head count for the reception, she said. You understand, right? She's got a very specific vision for the day. Of course she did. Lily always had a vision that didn't include me bringing a friend for support. But I told myself I'd go anyway. I bought a new dress, tailored just right. I polished my shoes. I even picked out a small gift from a local veteran-owned shop, hoping it might bridge the gap. As I carefully packed the gift, I replayed Robert's words. Lean on the family. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of them leaning on me, I still felt responsible for showing up, smiling, and pretending this was a typical family dynamic. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with awkward small talk. Margaret called once to confirm I knew the address. Robert texted asking if I could arrive early, to help out with a few things, but there was no warmth in his request. Just another reminder that in their eyes, I was still the dependable one. By the night before the wedding, I was exhausted not from work but from trying to fit into a family that didn't want me to belong. I left the gift on my kitchen counter and stood there, staring at it like it might give me some clue about why I was going. I hadn't heard a single word from Lily. No thank you for the RSVPs, no casual text asking if I was excited. But that wasn't surprising. Lily's entire life revolved around being the center of attention online, not caring about people offline. The week before the wedding, I debated whether even to show up. Brandon, my best friend from base, stopped by one evening to drop off some food. Are you sure you want to go? He asked, leaning against my counter. I shrugged. I already bought the dress, I said, half joking. But really, I was still clinging to some ridiculous hope that maybe showing up would mean something. Maybe it would fix the distance and prove I was part of this family. When I opened the invitation again later that night, my eyes kept landing on that missing +1. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a detail they forgot to include. Margaret probably proofread that card a dozen times, ensuring every font matched Lily's vision. I almost heard her voice, dismissive as always. It's about Lily's big day, Aaron. Keep things simple. So, I decided to keep things simple. I bought a pair of new shoes, which were not cheap, either genuine leather, polished to a mirror finish. I booked a blowout at one of the nicer salons downtown because I wanted to look my best and like someone who deserved a place at that wedding. Every day leading up to it, Savannah felt smaller. I would see Lily's face in local boutiques, staring down from promotional posters for some influencer brand partnership. I couldn't even walk to the coffee shop without passing a display with her smiling face. Her perfect life was everywhere, while I stayed invisible. When I picked up my dress from the tailor, the shop owner talked about the month's wedding rush. "Oh, you're going to that big one at the Whitaker mansion this weekend?" she asked excitedly. I just nodded. Yep, my sister's wedding. I didn't bother explaining further. Why ruin her cheerful image of a happy family event? The night before the wedding, Margaret finally called Minot to check in. Not to say she was glad I was coming, but to remind me of the parking situation at the mansion. "Make sure you arrive early," she said briskly. "The valet line gets long, and we don't want you getting stuck." Not a word about looking forward to seeing me. No thank you for RSVPing, buying a new outfit, or coming alone despite the obvious exclusion. Just logistics. Robert texted too. "Lily wants no phones at the ceremony, leave yours in the car." That one made me laugh a little. The irony of an influencer wedding banning phones was almost too perfect. But I didn't reply. What was the point? Every part of me felt tense when I laid out my dress that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what I did, I was still being tolerated, not welcomed. Brandon texted me one last time. "You good? I can go with you." But I knew better than to drag him into it. If Lily saw me show up with a guest she disapproved of, it would cause more drama. Besides, it wasn't like there was a +1 space for him anyway. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, wearing the dress to check the fit. It looked great tailored, elegant, respectful, and yet, somehow, I still felt out of place in it. Like I was dressing up for an event I had already decided I didn't belong to. Even so, I was determined. I would walk through that door, smile, and act like I deserved to be there. Because deep down, I knew I did deserve to be there, no matter how hard they tried to pretend otherwise. As I hung the dress back up and polished my shoes again that night, I felt something shift. I do not have hope exactly. It is more like a stubborn refusal to let them see me sweat. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. In the quiet of my house, I ensured everything was perfect for the morning. Dress steamed, shoes packed, small wedding gift wrapped neatly. When I finally sat down and checked my phone, there were no messages from Margaret or Robert. No last-minute updates. No checking in. Just silence. I barely slept the night before, but when I got up that morning, I moved with precision: shower, hair, makeup, polished but straightforward, dress on point, shoes shined, gift bag packed neatly. I felt oddly calm. It was almost like I was preparing for an inspection. Driving to the Whitaker mansion, the streets of Savannah felt postcard perfect. Spanish moss hanging over the roads, sunshine streaming through the trees, the setting that should have felt comforting. But nothing about this day felt comfortable. The mansion's front entrance was lined with luxury cars and valet attendants in starched uniforms. Guests were already milling about in expensive outfits, sipping champagne before heading inside. I parked carefully, checked my reflection last time, and stepped out, smoothing my dress. I held my head high. Whatever tension existed between me and my family, I wouldn't let anyone see it. As I approached the entrance, I felt eyes on me. Not just curious glances, real stares, whispered comments. I told myself it was all in my head. Until I got closer and saw Margaret and Robert standing near the doorway, arms crossed. They weren't smiling. Robert had that "we need to talk" look on his face. Margaret's lips were tight, eyes cool. A security guard checked a tablet as I approached. I smiled, trying to keep things light. "Hi, I'm Erin Caldwell," I said, voice steady. "Lily's sister." The guard tapped on the screen, brows furrowing. Then Robert stepped in, his voice firm but flat. "Erin, you're not on the list. ID." I blinked, feeling my heart skip. "What?" "You're not on the list," he repeated, louder this time, making sure nearby guests could hear every syllable. My hands tightened around the small gift bag I was holding. "I RSVP'd," I said, keeping my tone even. Margaret stepped forward just enough for me to see Lily, standing inside the entrance, veil perfectly arranged, bouquet in hand. "And Lily?" She was smiling. Not a kind smile, a triumphant, satisfied grin. Like she'd won something. Guests near the entrance started whispering. I caught a few words. That's her sister? Why is she being stopped? Did something happen? The security guard didn't move. He didn't have to. Robert's presence made everything clear. Dad, I said, voice dropping to almost a whisper. Mom, really? Margaret just shook her head. This is Lily's day, she said firmly, like that explained everything. It did explain everything. I glanced back at Lily one last time. Her grin didn't waver. She tilted slightly, adjusting her bouquet for a nearby photographer. No shame, no hesitation. I nodded slowly, turned without another word, and walked away. My shoes clicked sharply on the stone path, echoing in my ears. I kept my posture perfect, my steps steady, but every nerve felt raw inside. I heard the whispers growing louder behind me. A few camera phones lifted, catching this moment for posterity or gossip, who knows. When I reached my car, I momentarily sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. My throat felt tight, my eyes burned, but I refused to cry here. Not now, not where they could see it. I put the car in gear and pulled out slowly, past the rows of expensive vehicles. I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, makeup still perfect, but the tightness in my jaw said everything I needed to know. I didn't belong there. I never had. As I drove back through Savannah's streets, past tourists taking selfies, families laughing over brunch, and couples walking hand in hand, the absurdity of it all sat heavy on my chest. I had polished my shoes, tailored my dress, wrapped the perfect gift doll for nothing. No, worse than nothing. I had prepared to be humiliated in front of an entire guest list that didn't even know who I was. At a stoplight, I checked my phone reflexively. No text from Margaret or Robert, nothing from Lily. Just silence. The gift bag sat untouched in the passenger seat. I almost wanted to throw it out the window, but couldn't bring myself to do it. It symbolized everything I'd done for them over the year. Scareful, thoughtful, but unwanted. When I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. I glanced at it out of curiosity. It was a photo Lily had just posted. Her in her wedding dress